we'll start with Dalen Mack at number 5 for Texas A&M. Freshman last year, 32 tackles, 9.5 tackles for loss. That's a big, big number for a freshman to go in there and disrupt a game that much. He's a handful to deal with on the interior. He's a wide, powerful, really, strong guy with a quick first step for as big as he is. He lives in the backfield. One of the highest prospects ever to sign with Texas A&M, and he quickly just got thrown into that rotation. And Kevin Sumlin says he's down. Started at 340 pounds, is down to 313. So now that he's slimmed down, he might be even faster, and that's kind of a scary thought. Number 4, just because I like this guy a lot, I've watched him a lot. Montravius Adams from Auburn. He doesn't get a lot of lauding and a lot of talk about in SEC when you're ranking these, but he's a senior. He came back, 44 tackles, 2.5 sacks last year, 6 hurries. He comes back with Carl Lawson. I think that's a big thing. Lawson and Adams coming back together. He could have really left after last year, but he needs to come back and work on being a more consistent player. He's shown flashes to be a first-round player, but only flashes. He needs to become a lot more consistent to be that first-round type of player that he can be. His stats hasn't necessarily, translated, but only 3 tackles for loss over 13 starts last season. So he can get on top of the offensive line quick. That's what I like about him, but he rarely finishes in the backfield. That's why I can't put him higher than that. Like I said, he needs to become more consistent. He was a double team a majority of the 2015 season when Lawson kind of went out, so teams could concentrate on him a good bit. So I think if Lawson stays healthy, and has a big year, look for Adams to also have a big year. Number 3, I'll go with the Florida Gator, Caleb Brantley. It was a key reserve as a redshirt freshman 2 seasons ago, but he became a starter last year and played really, really, really well in the second half of the year. He's not the John Bullard type where he will live in the backfield, but he's that run stuffer that makes you have to account for him. So you have to run around him. You can't. He'll get far enough in the backfield. You have to run around him, and he'll let other guys make the play. But yeah, it's a strong finish last year. Is why I think he can take that next step and live in the backfield. Really, really quick first step and moves fast. So he's set up for a big, big, big season. Number 2, you know what? It's got to go to Missouri and Terry Beckner. He was a top 20 prospect. He was a top recruit in Missouri's 2015 signing class. Played in 10 games before a season-ending knee injury. But he's part of one of that defense has become a consistent best in the nation. He's really, really disruptive with 3 sacks, 8.5 tackles for loss. Like I said before that knee injury. So it's we have to, I think, say he's going to come back 100%. If he does, I think he'll live in that number 2 for the second best defensive tackle in the SEC. Number 1, I think we got to go with Devin Gacho from LSU. Started 10 games as a true freshman in 2014, but his wow, I can't even get the words out tonight. His tackles decreased a good bit last year. 42 as a freshman, only 4 left. Last year, 38. But he had 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss. So he's going to anchor in what we see, what we remember. All the Glenn Dorseys and the LSU's in the world. He's going to live up to that hype. I think he's surprisingly quick for a big guy who weighs close to 300 pounds. It'd be interesting to see how he deploys when LSU moves to this new 3-4 front. I think he'll be the anchor. He'll be that nose tackle. He'll move around a little bit, but it wouldn't. Dave Aranda's going to put him right in the middle, over the center, and tell him to go get the quarterback. So and stop those running backs. So that's my top 5 defensive linemen.
Starting at number 5, I have Terry Beckner Jr. from Missouri. Dave talked about him. Great presence there. For that number 5, you talked about, Chad, you talked earlier about a lot of teammates on this list. I really had to pick between Beckner Jr. and Josh Augusta from Missouri, who had another good year last year. I went with Beckner Jr. I think he's got a lot of tremendous potential coming back from Missouri. Missouri's a team, last year their offense was really bad, so there was a lot of pressure on their defense. They're flying under the radar. A lot of stuff has happened in Missouri last year and over the summer, so nobody's really talking about Missouri. They've got a couple of good defensive linemen. a couple good defensive ends. That defense might be surprising this year. And if it is, Beckner will lead that charge. At number 4, I have a guy that Dave didn't talk about, DJ Jones from Ole Miss. Ole Miss lost half their defense to the NFL draft last year. DJ Jones is a guy not a lot of people are talking about. He had 4 sacks last year, 5.5 tackles for losses, 40 tackles, 3 quarterback pressures. I think he's an all-around guy. He's got good size at 324, moves at 324 pretty well, and he's 6 foot. So it's a very solid 324 there. It's not tall and lean. And I think once you look at Ndiche, who are Ole Miss lost Ndiche last year, part of 3 really good defensive tackles that the conference lost last year, along with Robinson and Chris Jones out of Mississippi State. DJ Jones is going to fill that void. I think he's going to have a monster year here in Miss. At number 3, I had Daylon Mack as well from Texas A&M. I think his contribution is so important to the success of Myles Garrett. We had that defense. Texas A&M kind of defense had a rough year last year as far as stats wise, and I think Daylon Mack will go a long way to fixing that, especially if he's in another year of Chavis' system. 9.5 tackles for losses, just like Dave talked about. Great size at 6'1", 335. I think Mack is on his way to being an All-American there. At number 2, I had Caleb Brantley. I've watched him for a couple years down in Florida through the Tennessee games. He's one of these guys. Defensive tackle is such a tough position to rate because the stats can be misleading. Caleb Brantley is that Vince Wilfork type of nose tackle. He just occupies space, takes up space, and the stats aren't going to tell you how important Caleb Brantley is to that Florida defense. 3 sacks, 6.5 tackles for losses, 29 tackles, which sounds kind of pedestrian in a defensive-based conference. But if you look at that 6'2", 314-pound frame on film, not a lot of guys, not a lot of teams are able to run over center of that 1-2 hole against Florida just because of that one guy. And at number 1, I had Devin Goodchew from LSU, 6'4", 293. The only bad part about him, particularly like Dave said, is Aranda comes in and changes it to a 3-4. He's a little bit undersized for that traditional nose tackle role in a 3-4, coming in at 293. You like those guys to be 300 plus. If he goes to the NFL, he'll have to play in a 4-3, so he's not over the center guard combo to get blocked. But 6 sacks, 9 tackles for losses, 41 tackles, all-around guy, all-around defensive tackle. I think he's clearly the best returning tackle in the conference.
Very nice. I have to agree with you guys on Gottschall. He is, for I guess, kind of forewarning you on my list, he is my top guy as well. And actually, I'm really humbly surprised that you guys picked him as well, because I think I've had a chance to see this guy play for the last couple of seasons with him. You know, was covering, being close to Arkansas, I'm covering the Arkansas LSU games. And the guy's an animal, man. I've had a chance. Him and Christian LeCouture were another group. Was another guy that was very, very phenomenal. And you talked about the playing off of one another earlier, Mike, talking about Missouri. You know, I've actually watched those two in tandem, and of course with Beckwith there in the linebacking position. So it's always been real interesting to see how that works about. My top 5, man, it's really kind of a little bit different. I added some names that you guys didn't, and Breland Speaks out of Ole Miss is a guy that I'm looking at number 5. I think that he's going to be able to come in and be an impact player in the absence of Ndiche. He's a guy that can come in and make a big difference. I've looked him up. I've done some research on this guy. I went back, watched a couple videos on him. And I really liked what I saw. At 6'3", 313 pounds, his redshirt sophomore, he had 32 tackles, 5.5 for loss. He was a backup to Ndiche, so I think he's going to be able to come in and immediately have a big impact this year. That being said, I really had a hard time with it because the top 5, it's hard to say you can't do a top 5 without putting Daylon Mack on it, and that's where I would have put Daylon Mack was at number 5, but I edged it to Breland just because I think he'll have a little more success. At number 4, I put Caleb, Florida Gator. I think that I agree with you, Mike, on a lot of your aspect, and you as well, David. I do think he's going to be one of those type of guys that just comes in and absolutely plugs a hole. He's going to be hard to get around, and that's what you look for in a guy right up there in the middle, and I think that he's going to be able to do that, and that's going to force people to have to bounce it outside. And you guys know as well as I do, the guys that are coming off the end are going to be pretty monstrous for Florida this year. So I think that's going to be an awesome play. I think it's going to work really well. A guy at number 3 that neither one of you guys had on your list either was Dalvin Tomlinson out of Alabama. This is a guy I'm looking at. I think that can actually probably be an impact player as well. Alabama has, just kind of every year it's been plug and play for these guys. And I feel like Dalvin right now at 6'3", 306 pounds, he's going to be coming in and playing a major role after playing reserve. He had 6 pass breakups and he's done about 34 total tackles here. 4 quarterback hurries. He's done quite a bit. His hands and feet have increased as far as speed and technique are concerned. So that I really look forward to kind of seeing how he's progressed. And so we'll see, man. I mean, this guy was a former wrestler in high school. So he's going to love the contact up front. And of course, you guys know that with Alabama, it's pretty typical. Defensive line is going to be physical. They're going to find a way to get in there. Number 2, I put Adams from Auburn. You brought up the fact that Lawson is going to be in here, and I think Lawson coming back is really going to be beneficial. These two are going to be one heck of a tandem, and they're going to have to be. And let's be honest, Kevin Steele hasn't had a top 5 defense, top 10 defense, and Lord knows how long. And he's got the talent. They've got Brian Coward that they recruited, they brought in. So they've got some talent on here. This is Kevin Steele's 3rd stop in 3 years. Can he be an effective defensive coordinator? I mean, his job and his actual personal reputation, I think, are kind of on the line here. This is an area where he's going to have to take a step forward as a defensive coordinator and see what he can do and work with. They've got some pieces together. Auburn's made several moves on the defensive side of the ball, including safeties coach and things of that nature. So they're trying to make a step forward. And again, number 1 for me was Davin Gatchfeld. That was a guy that, again, I just love him. Length, he's got the arms. The guy's an animal. But here's the thing with LSU. They need more of him. They need more guys like Davin because that is the reason why LSU has not been able to get past Alabama in recent years. You go back to when Nick Saban was there prior to leaving, and he was at LSU. They had some monsters up front. And in the first couple years of Les's tenure, they had some big, beefy guys that just came in and they would swallow you up on the defensive line. That has not been the case in recent years. Davin is that mold of a guy, and I think they need some more. Like, Christian LeCouture has been a good player, but if you had a couple Davin Godchauls on your team, look, man, the sky's the limit. It would be really hard to get anything past the line of scrimmage on those guys. So that's my picks for the defensive line.